Sarah gave her a sympathetic look. Okay honey, just hold it a second. Your mommy will be right back. Rachel shook her head. Didn't this woman understand she needed a potty now? Can't wait, need to potty, she exclaimed. Sorry Rachel, but I can't take you to the potty until Megan's mommy or your mommy comes back, Sarah explained. Rachel squirmed in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs. She needed to go potty but no one was here to take her. It struck her that she shouldn't really need anyone to take her to the potty, and yet by now she needed to go so badly she was afraid even to stand up lest she lose control. It was all for naught though. After a few more seconds of struggling, Rachel felt her loins growing warm and wet and the pressure releasing. After holding it in so valiantly she had lost the battle. The feeling of release was so nice she had to fight not to sigh contentedly. She felt ashamed by what she was doing, but it was impossible to stop. It seemed she had quite a lot of pee-pee to get out. She felt it trickling through the leg holes of her pull-up, warm liquid running down her leg to her sandals as she sat on the edge of her seat. She tried to look nonchalant, like nothing had happened. No one could know the disgusting thing she'd just done. Honey, did you just have an accident? Sarah asked kindly. What? Rachel gasped. No, she insisted. Are you sure, dear? You didn't make pee-pee. Rachel shook her head again, refusing to admit the shameful truth. As she sat there in her cooling pee trying not to cry again, she felt a brief flicker of jealousy for Sue of all people. The teen girl was simply sucking away at her binky, content, oblivious to all the shame Rachel and the others were going through. Joy returned with Danny soon enough. The young man toddled along pulling ahead of his mommy, who held him by the hand, picking his nose with his free hand. As soon as Joy had him settled in his high chair again, Sarah turned to her and said, Joy, I'm afraid you have another little one needing a change. Oh, what happened? Rach really needed to potty a little while ago, but she hasn't said anything for a couple minutes and she got that look on her face I'd recognize anywhere. I'm pretty sure she's had an accident. Joy nodded and walked over to Rachel's side. The girl was about to deny she'd done any such thing, but her mommy didn't even bother asking her. She just reached down and yanked her skirt up, pulling back her pull-up and sticking 2 fingers down it. Rachel felt horribly violated, but worse, she knew the game was up now. Rachel honey, you're very wet. Why didn't you tell someone you'd had an accident? Mommy asked her. Rachel tried to think of an excuse, but she was drawing a total blank. I'm sorry Mommy, she gasped at last, tears filling her eyes. It's okay. Let's go to the bathroom and get you changed, Joy told her kindly, taking her hand. Rachel sniffled and let her mom lead her through the restaurant to the bathroom. She was sure everyone knew why she was being taken there. With every step her wet pull-up swished and squeaked across her thighs. The cooling pee made her bottom and legs sticky and uncomfortable. At least there was no one else in the ladies' room when they entered. Mommy took her to the largest stall, where a diaper changing station was built into the wall. Please Mommy, don't make me lie on it, she begged. Don't worry sweetie, you don't have to lie down. Little girls your age have accidents, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Joy lifted Rachel's dress and pulled her sopping wet pull-up down, slipping it off each foot. Pulling out a couple wet naps from the diaper bag, she wiped Rachel's privates and thighs, cleaning off the pee-pee. Looks like you leaked a bit, dear. I'm afraid you've gotten it all down your leg, Joy commented, getting more wet naps. Rachel stood still and thought about happy college memories while her mother wiped down her leg. Honey, you've even gotten it all over your sandals, her mother sighed, undoing the buckles on her glittery jelly shoes. Well, you can just go barefoot like your friends, Joy told her. Rachel pouted as she felt the cool tiled floor of the bathroom under her feet. She reminded herself that this wasn't so bad. Megan was the one sitting out in public topless, being barefoot was nothing compared to that. Mommy was getting out a new pull-up from the bag already and Rachel eagerly stepped into it, glad to feel the thick garment slipping up her legs and protecting her again. By the time Rachel and Joy returned to the table, Megan was wearing a new t-shirt and everyone was getting ready to go. None of them had a chance to speak to each other again before they were separated. Each found themselves being led to separate cars, wondering when they'd see each other again. The worst of it was they still didn't know what on earth had become of that cursed book. Destruction. Part of Megan was relieved to be home after the day she'd had. She'd woken up a kindergartner and somehow things had gotten worse from there. In fact, it would have been a relief if she'd woken up a kindergartner again the next morning. Even preschool age would have been an improvement on her present situation. As it was, she was still shivering from the traumatic experience of being sat topless in a booster seat at a family restaurant in front of her closest friends. Mommy dropped her bag on the floor in the living room and slipped Sue into a large automatic baby swing in the middle of the room while she went to check messages. "Meggie sweetie, play with your toys while Mommy checks the computer, and don't make a mess please," she called as she ran upstairs. Megan watched her sister rock slowly back and forth in the swing, awake but far from alert. She wiggled the teen's toes and whispered to her, "What's it like for you, Susie? What's going on in that head of yours?" Sue stuck her tongue out a bit and began blowing spit bubbles in response. Megan sighed and left her little sister to enjoy her silly swing. There were other things in the room to amuse herself with, of course. A jack-in-the-box sat in the middle of the floor, a set of large choke-proof Lego blocks nearby. Megan didn't want to touch them, lest she become enthralled with toddler toys again. She headed over to the couch instead, looking for the remote. She found it between the cushions and switched on the TV. A middle-aged white woman was smiling at the camera. "I want my little ones to get all the nutrition their growing bodies need. But there are so many brands out there that just can't deliver. That's why I stick with the tried-and-true company for babies' dietary needs, Gerber's," the woman enthused. The scene shifted and now the woman was seen standing in a kitchen with a lanky teen boy sat in a huge high chair before her. The boy was dressed in nothing but a puffy white diaper, grinning ear to ear and banging his hands on the tray as the woman spooned gooky yellow stuff into his open mouth. An announcer's voice explained that Gerber's Growing Bodies products were specially designed for infants aged 12 to 15 years old. "Ah!" Megan moaned, switching channels. A diaper ad appeared on the screen next. Now 2 older teens, 1 girl and 1 boy, were pictured lying on their backs on a soft white carpet dressed only in disposable diapers, giggling and pedaling their legs in the air while a graphic showed the stretchiness of the diaper. Megan turned the TV back off in exasperation. Just then Mommy hurried back into the room and scooped Sue out of her swing. "Okay Meggie, Mommy needs to give Susie her bathie, then it will be your turn. Be a good girl and stay in the living room for me." Megan nodded and watched her mother disappear with Sue riding on her hip. Now there really was nothing to do. She feared her mind would eventually turn to mush just like Sue's if she didn't find something to occupy her. Sitting down on the floor, she gave serious thought to giving in and playing with the Lego blocks. Maybe she could build a pretend city or something. By chance she glanced over at her mother's bag, lying on its side on the carpet nearby. Among the possessions visible there was a book, a black leather-bound book. Megan crept across the floor to the bag and reached inside. As she drew her hand back out, she got a feeling of elation for the first time tonight. It was Catcher in the Rye. The book was in her hands now, but she was no closer to figuring out what to do with it. She held it tightly in her hands and said out loud, "I want to be a grown-up again." Nothing happened. Megan stared hard at the book again and tried a new tack. "I like being a grown-up," she whispered to it. "I am happy as a grown-up," she pled, willing it to work. Her eyes shut tight, book gripped tightly, she wished silently over and over for it to change her back, to fix things. Then she opened her eyes and looked around. Nothing had changed. She was still dressed in a unicorn t-shirt and pull-ups, there were still toddler toys all over and an adult-sized infant swing in the middle of the room. Now Megan felt a new emotion, anger. In fact, it was more than just anger. Megan was enraged. If the book couldn't fix her, what good was it? It seemed that it could only make things worse, not better. After all, just as Rachel had pointed out the night before, things hadn't turned out so well for Holden Caulfield, had they? He'd ended up in a nut house. In fact, that's what happened to another devotee of this novel, John Hinckley, too. No, the book was clearly evil and there was only one way to deal with that. Megan knew she had to destroy the wicked thing and she had to do it now. First, she needed to make sure she wouldn't be interrupted. So she crept upstairs, hearing the sounds of cooing and giggling echoing down to her. At the top of the steps, she peeked her head just around the corner until she could see into the bathroom. Mommy had left the door wide open. Sue was sitting in a baby bath seat in the middle of the bathroom. It was a light green kind of plastic bucket seat with a big yellow spongy section between her legs. She was naked, of course. Mommy held a bright yellow rattle in one hand, shaking it high above Sue's head. The teen girl gaped open-mouthed up at it and squealed in delight, reaching her hands out for it and batting them clumsily about while Mommy cleaned her bare breasts and her tummy with a sudsy sponge in her other hand. Assured that Mommy was well distracted, Megan scurried downstairs and tiptoed into the kitchen. The place was well baby-proofed with plastic locks on every cabinet. While those may have thwarted a mental toddler, Megan easily undid them and rifled through cabinets and drawers until she found what she was looking for, a big box of matches. Grabbing the trash bin from beside the fridge, she dumped out its contents on the floor, then retrieved the book. Dropping it in the bin, she opened the matchbox and took a handful out. It was hard to get a grip on them individually. Her fingers were clumsy and she dropped the first couple. She listened intently for any sign Mommy was coming. Finally, the third match lit and she dropped it in the bin. It went out before it hit the bottom. Trying a new tack, she lifted the book back out and managed to light another match. This time she held it to the pages of the book until it lit up. She watched the yellowed old paper retreat, blackening and curling before disappearing in flames. Once the book was well ablaze, she dropped it back in the bin. The fire spread quickly and Megan grinned triumphantly as the novel was consumed. Thick acrid smoke began to pour from the bin and a moment later the smoke alarm began to beep loudly. Megan could hear Mommy hurrying down the hall and the stairs. She knew she'd be in trouble for this, but it didn't matter. The book was already destroyed. Whatever power it had was gone. She'd won. Oh my God! Megan, what are you doing? Mommy screamed as she came racing into the kitchen. Without asking for an answer, she raced to the sink and filled up a couple glasses with water, then dumped them in the bin. Just like that, the small fire was out. Amanda grabbed a tea towel and waved it wildly at the smoke alarm until it stopped its ear-piercing warning. Then she turned to Megan with shock and fear in her eyes. She lunged at the girl and grabbed her hands tightly. Naughty Megan. Playing with matches is very bad. You must never ever do that, she scolded, putting her face just inches from Megan's. Megan tried her best to look scared and contrite, but inside she was just hoping the whole world would shift back to normal any second. Her mother's scolding was cut short when Sue began crying loudly. Mommy gave Megan a stern look and told her, "Don't touch anything. Mommy will be right back." Her mother took the matches and hurried back upstairs to see why Sue was wailing, leaving Megan alone once more. She was disappointed that the world hadn't changed again, but relieved that at least things wouldn't get worse. Perhaps they would still be able to find a way to set things right yet. The smoke had cleared from the trash bin and Megan leant over it to see what was left of the book. There appeared to be nothing but watery ashes left in the bin. Megan smiled with satisfaction for a moment, but then the smile faltered. She squinted down into the bin. Was that something pink in there? Why would there be something pink in all those blackened ashes? Megan turned the bin over, dumping the contents onto the kitchen floor. Dropping the bin, she knelt by the pile of burnt paper on the floor. Sure enough, there was something pink sticking out of the blackness. She brushed aside some ashes and instantly jumped back, not believing what she saw. There was a new book amidst the destruction. It was a bright pink and glossy new-looking picture book with rounded corners and thick pages like a toddler book. Despite the cartoon images of bunnies on the cover, the title still said Catcher in the Rye. Sue's cries had died down by then, and Megan knew Mommy would be back to scold her soon. She didn't care about that. What she was seeing right now scared her far more than any punishment Mommy could dole out. Then things got worse. The book began to glow once again, though this time a bright pink emanated from it. The ashes and embers around it vanished, the smoky air clearing and the trash bin reappearing back next to the fridge where it was meant to be. Megan could only watch, transfixed, as the kitchen righted itself. Then the glow expanded and all she could see was the blinding pink light. She couldn't even shield her eyes. In her terror she felt pee-pee flooding her pull-up once again. Then her fear seemed to leave her, a feeling of peace and contentment settling like a soft blankie over her mind. Whatever it was she'd been thinking about a second ago didn't seem important anymore. And whatever it was, she couldn't recall it anyway. The pink light faded away and Meggie found herself sitting on the linoleum floor of a clean kitchen, warm pee-pee squishing around her bum and a pretty pink book on the floor nearby. Meggie liked pink. She couldn't quite recall what the color was called, but she knew she really liked it. Mommy walked into the kitchen with Sue bouncing on her hip. She smiled down at her 21-year-old toddler daughter as the girl squatted on the floor looking curiously at some picture book. "Meggie, what are you doing? Are you trying to read like a big girl?" Meggie smiled innocently up at her mother and shook her head. "No. Meggie no wed. Meggie week pictures," she announced. "Oh, you like the pictures?" Mommy translated. Meggie nodded, then dropped the book and slapped at her crotch with both hands. "Made pee-pee, Mommy." Meggie had accident. "That's okay, Meggie, Mommy will clean you up, but then you have to show me you can use the potty like a big girl before you go to bed, boys. Can you do that for me, honey?" Mommy bargained. Meggie nodded eagerly, desperate for her mommy to see she could be a big girl. And so it was that Meggie finished her day sitting on a big pink potty seat in her mom's kitchen, smiling ear to ear and clapping her hands with glee when the sounds of pee-pee splashing on plastic finally filled the air. Daycare. Joy pulled her minivan up in front of Sarah's house the next morning, tooting the horn twice and then glancing at her kids in the rearview mirror. They seemed to be fine, though Rachel was still looking cranky. Joy hoped her little girl would get over her sour mood soon, her constant whining was getting tiresome. Rachel sat in her car seat in the middle row of the minivan with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. She was going to daycare now, daycare. Kindergarten had been bad enough. What kind of boring, mindless activities could she be expected to be subjected to now? In the car seat beside her, Danny had no such worries, of course. Dressed in a Toy Story t-shirt and loose blue sweatpants, his feet were still free of shoes or socks. Danny was perfectly content to swing his dangling legs back and forth and munch on his thumb. Meanwhile, Rachel was again disgusted with her outfit. Today Mommy had put her in a blue and white check dress with short sleeves and a hem that fell to her mid-calves. Underneath she wore a Tangle-inspired cartoon print pink pull-up. She couldn't take solace in the fact that she had shoes today because they were ugly white kiddie sneakers with Barbie decals. The laces were covered in glitter and her clumsy fingers meant she'd need to ask for someone's help to tie them. The frilly white socks only added to their silliness. Though they matched the girly dress and the big pale blue bow Mommy had fixed atop her head. As they waited in the car, the front door of the house swung open and Sarah appeared leading Brian out by the hand. Rachel felt slightly better upon seeing her friend in his toddler get-up. Sarah had dressed the young man in a pair of blue and white pinstripe train engineer shortals over a bright red t-shirt. A Thomas the Tank Engine decal was even visible on the bib of his shortals. Once again Sarah had seen no need to put shoes on the 20-something, so he padded barefoot down the front steps, holding his mommy's hand. Joy hopped out and slid open the minivan door so Sarah could help her boy inside. She had a big car seat for him in her free hand and she and Joy set about placing it in the back row. Rachel could see there was no real need for such seats. After all, the world hadn't gotten any larger, the normal seatbelts would fit them as well as their parents. No, the purpose of the seats was to keep the child constrained and unable to undo the seatbelt. There we go. Okay, big guy, come to mommy, Joy beckoned once the seat was in place. Without a word, Brian let mommy strap him into the car seat, leaving him sitting high enough so his bare toes just brushed the floor of the car. Good boy, mommy praised, leaning in and pecking a kiss on his cheek. Sarah and Rachel stepped outside and the door slid shut with a bang. While the two mommies chatted, Rachel twisted around as best she could and looked back at Brian. So, where's the book? Brian frowned and shrugged, looking defeated. What's that supposed to mean? Rachel demanded. It means I looked everywhere last night and the book is gone. After mommy went to sleep, I snuck all over the house, but there was no sign of it. So you just gave up? Rachel snapped. Well, what else could I do? Keep looking. This is our lives we're talking about, Brian. Nothing is more important than finding that book. Well, did you search your place? Of course I did. It wasn't there, of course. We left it at your place after all. Brian just shrugged as a beeping noise alerted them to Joy opening the door and hopping back in the car. They spent the rest of the ride in tense silence. The car soon pulled up in front of what appeared to be a normal house. However, there was a sign on the fence that identified it as Grow Together Daycare and Nursery. Indeed, the front yard was cluttered with children's toys. An aging metal swing set was placed near the side fence and a deflated pink bouncy ball sat in the driveway. Once Joy had the three freed from their seats, she led them up the paved footpath to the front door. There was a sign placed on it which matched the one on the fence, save for the addition of the words, caring for little ones aged 10 to 24 years. Of course, neither Brian nor Rachel could read the sign, nor recognize the numbers on it. Somehow that information had seeped out of their brains. The moment they stepped over the threshold into the daycare, Brian and Rachel were bombarded with a cacophony of sound. Someone was crying loudly, other voiced screamed and screeched in the distance. They could hear the pounding of heavy footsteps here and there in the house. The walls of the alcove were decorated in sheets of colorful construction paper with glued-on macaroni designs and glitter. Running along the wall just below the ceiling was a line of linked colored paper cutouts in the shape of balloons, each with a name on them. Some were clearly written by an adult in black marker. Others had childish scribbles in crayon, barely decipherable as names. Hi there. They all looked over to see a 30-something woman entering the alcove from the main room, glowing at them. Hello, Pam, Joy greeted. Then she looked Brian and Rachel in the eyes and said, well, come on kids, say hello to Miss Deva. Hi, they mumbled. The woman nodded and replied in a syrupy sweet tone, hello children. Are you ready to have fun today? Rachel just stared at the woman coldly, but Brian managed a feeble nod. Danny, on the other hand, was clapping his clumsy hands gleefully. Okay then, say bye-bye to mommy and we'll join the others. They waited while Danny gave his mother a bear hug that seemed to last forever. When she at last managed to separate from him, she guided his hand right to Pam's, letting her lead him away, still vigorously waving his goodbyes to mommy. The playroom the woman led them into was noisy and cluttered. In the far corner of the room, a half-dozen children who looked to be in their early 20s were sitting on the floor at the feet of another adult carer. She was reading to them from a big picture book, holding open the pages so they could all see the illustrations. The young men and women gaped up at it in rapt attention. They appeared to be a bit older than Rachel and Brian. A second group of even older kids were seated in a circle in the middle of the room. There were no overalls or pull-ups peeking out of skirts among this group. These former young adults rocked eagerly back and forth on their butts while one young man in a red Cars t-shirt circled them, patting heads and singing duck, 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 goose. He bopped the pigtailed head of a young woman and then took off running around the outside of the circle while she gave chase. Their giggles echoed through the room. Brian took in the room as the carer led them across it. Tonka trucks and matchbox cars were scattered across the carpet. Stuffed animals were discarded here and there. The walls were a bland creme tone, and the carpet originally must have been brown. Both the walls and carpet were tarnished by stains. This room wasn't meant for toddlers though. No, the carer was leading them past this playroom and into an adjoining one. As soon as they entered this second room, it was apparent that it was meant for younger kids. The walls were painted in a mural of rainbows and bucolic scenes of fields and playful animals. It was so saccharine sweet it made Rachel want to gag. They had barely entered the room when a man rushed up before them, blocking their way. He was a big man, at least 6 feet tall with buzz-cut blonde hair, a square jaw and thick neck. He was built like a marine. But the way he walked was off, his gait a bit uncoordinated and halting. He was wearing a green cartoon print t-shirt which just reached his belly button and pair of bright blue pull-ups. He had no shorts to cover them up and he eagerly hopped up and down making the whole room shake as he exclaimed, "Looky. Maked all gone," as he raised his arms and showed his empty palms to the carer. "Yes, Timmy, I see you ate all your crackers. Good boy." The well-built man beamed and then began to wriggle and squeal as she reached in and tickled his exposed tummy with her free hand. As Timmy scurried back to his toys, Danny pulled free of Pam's grip and toddled off after the larger man. Rachel and Brian didn't move though, they were still taking in the occupants of the room. Some of them were kids they recognized from kindergarten the day before. Now though they were mostly sitting on their butts on the floor or lying on the tummies, playing with silly little toys. Aside from Timmy, a couple other boys wore no pants or shorts over their pull-ups. The rest wore shortals, frilly dresses, and other toddler wear. One man was creeping along the carpet on his hands and knees right at their feet. He had a toy horse held with both hands and he was simply banging it on the floor. As they stared down pitifully at him, he looked up into their faces, raised the toy in the air and announced, "Go moo. Moo moo." "Aren't you a smarty?" Rachel commented sarcastically. Brian brushed Rachel's arm to get her attention. "What?" she asked quietly, turning to him. He looked at her with concern as he admitted, "Rachel, the toys they have here. They're baby toys, stuff for stupid little tots. But a big part of me wants to try them out. I dunno why, but I kinda want to play with 'em." Rachel returned his look of concern, frowning. "Well, don't give in to it. We're not like these drooling idiots," she reminded him. Pam returned from getting Timmy and Danny settled, smiling at the serious-looking duo. She looked them up and down quickly and chirped, "Why the long faces, you two? Don't you wanna play with your friends?" They managed to give her a hesitant nod, playing along. "Okay then, Rachel, sit on your bottom for me please," she directed. "What? Why?" "Because I said so, silly. Now be a good girl and sit on your bottom." Rachel frowned again but did as she was told. She didn't want to make a scene. Pam knelt before her and took her right foot in her hand, undoing the glittery laces of sneaker. "What you doing?" Rachel asked. "Shoes make the carpet dirty, Rachel, you know that. We'll just put these in your cubby till your mommy comes to get you." Looking around, Rachel noticed that nearly all the other kids were indeed barefoot, only a couple wearing socks. But you've got shoes," Rachel insisted, hoping to stay one level above the rest of the mindless tots in this place. Pam chuckled as she slipped one sneaker off and started on the other. "Yes dear, what a smart girl you are. I need my shoes because I have to go out and do grown-up things. Children have no need for such things." "Don't worry, you'll be much more comfy this way," she assured, slipping the second shoe off. Rachel felt so powerless. It was silly to be so wounded by simply having her shoes taken off her, yet it made her really sad. She knew she shouldn't be getting so worked up over it, that she was acting like a dumb little kid, and yet she felt her nose clogging with mucus, her eyes tearing up. She fought to maintain control, sniffling and blinking her eyes to hold back the tears. It was just shoes, she reminded herself. And stupid kiddie shoes she hated anyway. Of course it was more than that. Rachel was crying because she was powerless to stop the woman, because she felt trapped and dependent. Pam left with Rachel's sneakers as the girl wiped her eyes with her arm and sniffled loudly. Brian squatted beside her and rubbed her shoulder. It was just your shoes. I don't even have any to be taken away, he reminded her. Before Rachel could tell him off, tell him it wasn't just about silly shoes, they were distracted by the arrival of a new child in the room. Megan had just toddled into the room, not from the doorway they entered by, but from a side room. Apparently she had arrived here before them. She was dressed in a light pink sleeveless dress that fell just below her knees. Her pigtails bounced as she hurried through the room with an immature gait. Megan! Rachel called out, forcing her tears back and standing again. Megan looked over at her friends and a big smile appeared on her face. She scurried over to them, and Brian felt somehow disquieted by her broad grin. It wasn't like she was happy or relieved to see them. It was like she was actually very happy about being here, like she was really enjoying herself. Megan stopped before them, cocking her head a bit to the side and blinking wordlessly at them. Megan, how long have you been here? Rachel asked, trying to ignore the goofy grin on her friend's face. Meggie PP, the college girl replied gleefully. Brian and Rachel shared astonished looks. Megan, don't play around. This isn't funny, Rachel told her. But Megan was still looking cheerful as ever. Apparently incapable of standing still, she was playing with the hem of her skirt and twisting back and forth. Meggie go potty pot, she announced, ignoring Rachel's admonition. Now Rachel and Brian were genuinely frightened. What the hell was wrong with Megan? She'd been fine the last time they saw her. Well, as fine as one could be in the circumstances. Yet now she was acting like peeing in the potty was an exciting accomplishment. Megan, do you remember who we are? Brian asked, trying to be gentle. Megan's wide blue eyes remained blank, empty of recognition. Got a dowie, Megan told them, pointing in the direction of a pile of toys no other kids were near. Rachel couldn't take it anymore. Megan, cut this out right now. You're not a dumb little kid, Megan. You're an adult, a grown-up. You don't use a stupid potty chair, you don't wear pull-ups and play with dolls. You're bigger than that. Megan stared at the angry woman with worried eyes, as though afraid Rachel might reach out and hit her. Then she blinked and seemed to be trying to think. For a second they held out hope that somehow they'd gotten through to her, reached out to the part of her that still knew who she really was. Megan grasped the hem of her dress with both hands and insisted, Meggie by gol, flipping the dress up to expose her Winnie the Pooh pull-ups. She twisted back and forth with her dress pulled up to her chest, then began chewing absent-mindedly at the hem, wiggling her bare toes together, eyes tracing the ceiling. Brian and Rachel knew they had lost an important ally. Megan was gone, there was no doubt about that anymore. All that was left was Meggie, a silly potty-using, thumb-sucking little toddler with an exhibitionist streak. What was worse, they had no idea how Megan had ended up this way or how to avoid a similar fate themselves. While Meggie skipped back over to her pile of toys, Rachel and Brian settled on the floor where they'd been standing. She's gone, Rachel lamented. Do you think that could happen to us? Of course it could, Rachel snapped, angry. Look at what's already happened. So what do we? Brian trailed off as a pantsless young man crawled up to them with a toy in his hands. It was an 8-sided yellow plastic ball with different shaped holes on each side for matching plastic blocks to be fit through. The young man banged it repeatedly on the floor, making the couple blocks within it clatter about. Then he thrust it at them, sitting back on his bottom with bare hairless legs spread wide. He sucked his thumb and stared at them hopefully. I think he wants the blocks out of it, Brian suggested. So how is that our problem? Rachel asked callously. Let's just do it so he'll go away, Brian told her. He picked up the toy and shook it to get a look at the blocks. The sounds this action produced were quite satisfying actually. Brian gave the toy another good shake and was rewarded with more sounds. Somehow, knowing he was producing those sounds made him feel good, like he was in control. He sat back on his butt and continued shaking the thing, banging it on the floor over and over. It didn't get old, in fact he liked the repetition. What are you doing? Rachel demanded, grabbing his arm to stop him. Brian paused, realizing Rachel was still sitting there. Then it hit him what he was doing. He was sitting there in his shortals, toes wiggling back and forth, shaking a plastic toddler toy with a big stupid grin on his face. The smile was wiped from his face and he stammered, I dunno what happened. Rachel was shaking her head. I'll tell you what happened. For a minute there you looked just like a real toddler, grinning away while you made noises with that dumb toy. Brian nodded in shame, blushing. Let's just get the blocks out and get rid of this thing, he mumbled. Fine, Rachel agreed, taking it from him. For a fleeting second Brian felt an overwhelming urge to seize it back from her, to scream out that it was his. He didn't want to share the toy, he wanted to keep making all the noises. It took all his willpower not to yell out, mine, but he held it together. Rachel shook the toy lightly, producing smaller noises. The pull-up-clad young man facing them clapped his hands in glee, and Brian shivered in disgust as he realized how he must have looked a moment ago. I can't get it out. Rachel complained. What? The stupid shapes, they are stuck. You just have to match them, that's all, he assured her. I know that, dummy. I can't. Brian looked closely at the shapes within. There was a red square block and a green triangle, though for some reason the names escaped him. Still he recognized the shapes and he recognized the same shapes on the outside of the yellow toy. But as soon as he looked back at the blocks inside he lost track of which shape matched which hole. Something in his mind was missing and he couldn't make the connection. It was terribly frustrating and concerning.